Thank you for tuning in to another episode of InRange. Today is the July Q&A, and all of these questions are provided by Patreon supporters at the $5 and above level. If you already are one of them, I'd like to thank you very much because InRange is only supported by people like you. No advertisers, no sponsors, no corporations, completely you, the viewer. And thank you for keeping InRange alive and allowing us to do the type of honest things we do on this channel, because without viewer support, a channel like InRange could not survive nor exist. So let's just get going. We have a gazillion questions as always. Cameron W. In regards to WWSD 2020, will you be revisiting red dots? And should I wait on your conclusion, or should I just go ahead and get a Holosun 503G ACSS from the 2017 project? I would say to wait. We are visiting it. We're doing a whole series right now of American red dots, and you may have seen some of them already. Some of them are turning out to be really good products, and we're also going to do some other red dot stuff as well. And I've got some other optics that I'm working on in the project. So I would advise you to wait, but I would also say that the Holosun has continued to be an excellent solution, and I would not advise against it either. So if you're wanting to get the ball rolling and you want to just go with Holosun, I would not advise against it. But I would say that if you're willing to wait and be patient, there will be things coming on the channel about the What Would Stoner Do project in regards to 2020 and a refresh on optics in general. Paul S. Given the pandemic, what is the current word on brutality matches in the continental US? Well, for those of you not familiar, the brutality matches are our big events here at InRangeTV. They are the kind of the nationals, for lack of a better term, of the two-gun action challenge match. And you've probably seen it here on the channel, such as Desert Brutality and also Finnish Brutality, which is going to be happening. I will not be attending Finnish Brutality due to the situation with the pandemic. I am going to stand back, but I'm going to be filming some content from Arizona for the project, and I have created all the stages, and they look incredibly epic. So I hope that everyone that is able to make it there is going to love it. And it sold out in like 3 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. So Finnish Brutality is going to be amazing. We did have some projects for later in the year. We had the West Virginia event called Woodland Brutality, and we were going to do something called World War III Brutality in November. Both of those have stood down, and we are going to revisit them for 2021. So as it stands currently, given the current instability of things in the US, whether it's based on the pandemic or other things, we've decided to wait and take and see, and we are setting tentative dates right now for 2021 for both Woodland Brutality and World War III Brutality. And by the way, World War III Brutality is particularly amazing, and I would advise you to stay tuned for that one. As always, all of the matches that are brutality matches, whether it's Woodland Brutality or World War III Brutality or Desert Brutality or Finnish Brutality, people who are in the two-gun action challenge group or two-gun army group on Patreon get early and discounted access. So something you may want to consider, but at this moment we have to admit that we are standing down on all of them due to the pandemic situation and general instability in the US, which is a weird thing to have to say, but a reality of the situation we're facing right now. Chadi P. If you had to move out of the USA, where would you settle? That's a really hard question to answer. The reality is, I think the obvious one would be Finland, if it was possible, because I have friends there, and I understand Finland. I've spent quite a bit of time now in Finland, and it would be probably the easiest migration path for me by already knowing a whole bunch of people and understanding the layout of the land, for lack of a better term. So to answer this question, I would have to say Finland, because I have connections there, and that makes it a much more viable choice right off the bat. Not hidden in some bunker. Oh no. Is HiPoint a good starter pistol for first-time owners? No. HiPoint is a surprisingly decent pistol for what it is, to be honest. HiPoints are actually more reliable than they're given credit for, but they are ergonomic nightmares. They're giant blocks and heavy, and generally even the sights don't regulate to point of aim. So I would advise you, if you had extra money to spend, to go with something a little better than a HiPoint. But if your budget dictates otherwise, I would say that a HiPoint typically is a functional gun, and I would not advise against it if that's where your budget was. But that said, I would not recommend a HiPoint for a first pistol if you could spend a little more and get something better. And the obvious question is going to be, what would that be? And the obvious answer would be a Glock, probably a Glock 19. Andrew C. You think that with all the new gun owners, because of a recent event, might lead to a demand for less gun restrictions? I don't know. I don't know that the people currently buying guns are the people that are going to be gun rights activists. I think they're buying them in a panic. And while they now own them, the reality of going out and using them and training with them are two different things. Will they go out and train with them? Will they become people that are now gun firearms rights proponents? Or are they just going to be a random person that happens to now own a gun? I think a lot of them are going to be just a random person that owns a gun based on whatever scary thing that got them to buy one right now. So do I think we're going to see a lessening of gun restrictions as a result of new firearms ownership? I hate to say this, but my negative, cynical response to that is no, we will not. I think we're going to see a push for more, not less. We may see that more will not succeed, but I do not think we're going to necessarily see a reduction. Kory Z, what is the one thing that annoys you most about gun culture? Well, this is a loaded question. I think we're seeing it in the channel right now, and the reality is, I think I'm going to have to mention a few things. One is the incongruent and inconsistent application of logic. We talk about gun rights being a universal thing, and then when we bring up topics about gun rights being used by traditionally and consistently marginalized groups, like for example the video here on InRange about the Lumbee versus the Klan, the amount of covert or blatant racism that exists in the comments, or even from people that were originally supporters in the audience, dictate to me that there is a problem within our community, and that while we speak one thing, we act another. Not all we. That's not an all-inclusive term, but as a large group, there is a significant number of people in this audience that speak the talk or talk the talk of rights for all. But when we need to apply them, the reality is what their intrinsic belief systems are something very different. And a lot of people don't want to admit that, neither within the community or amongst themselves, but it's absolutely the truth. Whether it is for people of color or economically challenged individuals or gender or sexual preference, these things all seem to come up as trigger points to people within our community that bring out their true colors. Another example of this that I'm going to bring up is the mask issue. There are so many people talking about how they would do anything as sheepdogs to protect their community. We got a whole thing about sheepdogs that are going to come to this channel, so just wait for that. But the reality is, when it asked, not required, asked to merely put a piece of cloth over their face to protect the community around them, while they're supposedly willing to armor up, wear a rifle, wear a gun, wear ammunition, and they talk about that, and they go out and train to be the sheepdog, when the best thing you can do to protect those around you in the community is put a freaking simple cloth mask over your face while in a public community, is too much and too much to bear. And as an example of government tyranny, there's something significantly hypocritical and full of shit in the people calling them that, to be blatant, and I don't know how to use any other word than that. If you consider yourself someone that's here and you want to protect the community, and being asked to wear a mask is too much, but asked to wear a gun because you have fantasies about when you get to shoot someone with it, there's something actually wrong with your mindset. It is not about protecting the community. It's about using that tool as some sort of symbol of power, and man, that is the most dangerous reason to want to own a gun. Robert S. Are there any practical advantages of a SMG converted to semi-auto over a semi-auto pistol that uses the same cartridge? Yeah, there is. So you're talking about a pistol caliber carbine at that point, and the huge advantage is that you have multiple points of contact and therefore have better aim. The reality is you have stock, a cheek weld, maybe a red dot sight that's easier to acquire than one mounted on a pistol, and as a result, a PCC, even a semi-automatic conversion to an original SMG done right, will give you handling and ergonomic and accuracy advantages over that of a pistol, which require far more training and skill to use effectively. So yeah, there are advantages. Peter A. What's your take on laser-assisted dry fire systems? Worth the money or just a gimmick with no practical value? Well, let me tell you, I haven't used them a lot, but I have used them a little, and I will say that they have some purpose. They really do help you. You can try dry fire at home. You can absolutely get response to what's going on with your trigger discipline and handling with that laser. Now, one of the things you can do is land up gaming that system where you know that you're not using a live round, and therefore things that happen with live rounds, such as flinch and recoil anticipation may not manifest after using the dry fire system for a while. But you can absolutely use dry fire as a tool, laser assisted or not, to train yourself to better sight alignment, to quicker sight acquisition, and proper trigger press. So I would say that they have some value. Bunny. Are CNC machine bullets like those made by Lay worth the extra cost, especially when dealing with lesser calibers like 380? In my opinion, no, not at all. Uh, Carefully crafted, highly precision bullets have a place in the world, and therefore precision shooting. And you're not going to be doing precision shooting with a 380. So I do not know why you would spend more money on something that is a precision bullet for something like a cartridge like 380 when you could do the same thing with probably just hard cast lead. So in my opinion, no, that would not be worth your money. It's only worth your money when you're trying to be a precision shooter with a precision round doing precision work. Thomas N. 5.7 revolver potential. You're talking about the 5.7 cartridge for like the 5.7 FN pistol. I don't see it. I don't see why. I don't know why you'd want that in the revolver, but that said, I wouldn't be surprised if someone comes out with one. The 5.7 is seeing a bit of a renaissance as an accepted and popular round. It is an interesting round. I'll give it that. And so, will a revolver ever come? Probably. Would I buy it? No. Pratik. I don't own a gun yet, as I live in California. Sad face. I understand. Where do I even start when it comes to figuring out what gun to get? Man, that's a challenge. In California, the rules that you have to deal with are unfathomably complex and obtuse, and I don't even know where to start with that. I'll tell you, my first instinct with guns in California is consistent. Um, I'm not a big fan of these things with jury-rigged magazines loaded down to 10 rounds or any of that because they're just going to change the laws on you again. They might eventually do that with anything. But what I would advise would be an M1 Garand. It is a historic firearm. It is an accurate, reliable firearm. It's a powerful firearm. It is very quick to reload with 8 rounds in an en-bloc clip. And at this moment, it does not appear to be in much danger from even California politicians, at least not to any significant degree. So in that regard, I would go with an M1 Garand. Why not? Windwalker 57. What military or police issue long arm and sidearm would you take back to a fight in World War I if you had to use ammunition available at the time? All right, so we're talking about rounds that are available in World War I. So let's go ahead and start with the long arm. So the long arm would be 30-06 or 8mm Lebel or 8 Mauser or, yeah. So, all right, so you are not excluding me from anything modern. I just have to use a cartridge that is extant at that time. I would take an M1 Garand in 30-06 because I can get that round. Now it's an overpowered version of 30-06 and it might eventually cause some wear and tear on an M1 based on M2 ball. But I would take an M1 Garand. And when it comes to a pistol, I would go with something in 9mm. I would take a Glock. Brendan S. Do you think that competition shooting creates an unfair and unrealistic bias towards lower power cartridges? Yes and no. It depends on the competition you're involved in. Let me tell you. So, Single Action Shooting Society, the Cowboy Shooting Group, CAS, Cowboy Action Shooting, absolutely does this. They've put a minimum power factor on the cartridges required to be used in certain divisions, but the reality is that minimum power level is so ridiculously low and so infrequently checked that a lower power cartridge has a huge advantage in a game that is completely based around speed at very close targets. So in Cowboy Action Shooting, the answer is absolutely yes. And in most competition shooting in which ranges are within 200 yards or less, there's also that there going on. So I would recommend that if we want a fully realized, fully functional, fully practical competition shooting environment, you have to occasionally do things in which more higher power cartridges need less hits on target or present targets that are knocked down only by higher power cartridges or present targets at range that are affected by lower power cartridges in terms of wind call, wind drift, etc., that a higher power cartridge is not. So it's something I do try to do occasionally at two-gun action challenge match and brutality matches is present different requirements for engagements on targets. So with a full power cartridge, you only have to hit it once, but with an intermediate cartridge, you have to hit it twice, and with a PCC, you have to hit it 3 times or something like that. I think this can be mitigated, but I think that if you don't do something to actively mitigate it, yes, lower power cartridges do provide an advantage in competition and therefore skew our perspective on the topic in general. Nicholas P. Was there any specific piece of media, games, movies, or books that got you interested in the world of firearms history? Um, there's a game indeed, but it had nothing to do. It didn't really get me into firearms history, but it got me interested in history. And I've talked about this before. There was a game by a company called Dynamics. It's called Red Baron, and it was a really early World War I flight simulator that provided a very fantastic, historically accurate manual and missions in game that represented actual missions by actual soldiers and flyers during the war. And while you look back at it now and it's an archaic, ugly looking, pixelated, polygonal nightmare, the game totally triggered my imagination about World War I aviation and continues to this day. It got me probably mostly what got me mostly interested in history and inspired that. So if I could pick one thing, it would be Red Baron by Dynamics. It's a really interesting World War I game, and World War I is underemphasized in our gaming and media environment in general. Teddy, do you have any particular methods you use to identify a pawn shop, a surplus store, or other small retailers that tend to have interesting firearms accessories? Yes, little shops in little towns run by probably an older couple that have some sort of frontier look to them, like a wooden front or something like that. Those are the ones I go, oh my gosh, that's probably going to have something worthwhile. Or, oddly, pawn shops in little communities. The larger the city, the more it's going to be just ARs and Glocks endlessly with nothing interesting. If they have tactical in the name or something like that, avoid them like the plague if you're looking for something interesting, because there will be nothing interesting there. It'll be all black rifles, all black pistols, all boring, all the same. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with those guns, but if you're looking for things that are interesting, those places are not the place to look. You want to look for places like called the Frontier or Frontiersman or Old West Trading or something like that. And in a smaller community, the chances of you finding something cool are much, much greater. Red Army reenactor. When talking about World War II on the Eastern Front, people often praise the German machine guns and denigrate their Soviet counterparts. Do you find that these comparisons are fair given the differences in when they were developed? No, not really. I mean, the Germans had a huge advantage with the G34 and later G42. You could argue that the MG42 was a disadvantage due to its rate of fire. Quite honestly, the 34 was better. The MG42 only became something that they made for reducing the cost of manufacture with stampings, etc. But the rate of fire of the MG42 was not advantageous. In fact, it burned through barrels and ammunition at a rate faster than was necessary for a combat application role. The MG34 was a fantastic gun. But when you look at the Soviet thing, like the DP-27, DP-28, DPM, even though they had that giant pie plate loading dish, the record player, as the Finn said, Emma, as the song say. It was a fantastic machine gun, and while those plates were hard to carry, they were easier to carry than belts. So no, I do think that the Soviet equivalents were, and the Maxims for that matter, they were hard to move, but once you got them in place, they were capable of sustained long rates of fire. So no, I think it is unfair, and I think the Soviet machine guns were excellent weapons. And while some of them were earlier in design, there was nothing really wrong with them, and they learned how to use them appropriately in their role. Andrew C. Did you make that outside table that you used for reviews? No, I didn't. I bought it from a Mexican market south of Tucson. It is an import from Mexico, and they do amazing work with just wettens or wet wood bent to the proper shapes and then nailed together, and that's exactly what it is. I kind of like that it's become an iconic thing for the channel. That table is a cool filming location, but no, it's from Mexico. Matthew J. Any chance of winter brutality somewhere in the frozen Northlands at some point? Funny you asked that. It's in the works. More to come. Michael K. Have you ever considered doing a match series where you take your most competitive gear and going all for the win? We know that you are a great shooter. Thank you, I guess. But because you are frequently demonstrating obsolete or obsolescent weapons, you end up with a big handicap. No, not really. And let me tell you why. Every time I've ever profiled essentially modern guns and gear on two-gun action challenge match stuff, or and even touched on it with Desert Brutality, the interest levels drop precipitously. The audience generally wants to see me struggle with something old and hard. And I don't know why, but that's what is more interesting content for the viewer. So in terms of bringing something out and just trying to show performance, we see Russell Fagan do that on the channel with regularity. And oddly, even when he shows his scores, there's hostility met from part of the audience. They're like, I thought this was about a gun, not about how good you are at shooting, blah, blah, blah. So, no, probably not. And I actually, to be honest with you, I think it makes for better, interesting video content. And I kind of have fun using that weird old stuff. Not to say that I'll never do it, but There's some stuff here and there. Recently, I shot a Galil Ace on the clock and came in 4th out of 40 overall. And so there's some modern-ish gear, but it's not stuff that I trained with, for example. But you'll see it here and there. Yulin. With my eyesight getting old, main issues when sighting systems do you think would work best from 0 to 500 yards? Defense and pest control, prism, red dot, or low power variable? I would go with low power variable. The reality is you can focus that to your eyes, even at the 1x setting, and then you can then zoom in when you need a little more oomph. So for someone whose eyesight's failing, I would absolutely go with an LPVO. Lane W. Now that you've had trigger time with the H&K G36, I have to say it was a Tommy-built T36, but built from all German parts, or mostly German parts. What are your thoughts on the German Army's decision to retire or replace the weapon? I think it's the wrong call. I also have an MR556, which is the civilian equivalent of the H&K 416, and it is a heavy pig of a rifle with a piston system. And unless you're going with a particularly short barrel gas system, I don't see the advantage of it. I would recommend the G36 with a proper sighting system on it over the HK 416, and I think the G36 deserved more development. While there are issues with the sighting system they put on there, ditch that, put on something better, and go with it. I think it's a fantastic, lightweight, reasonably accurate rifle with excellent ergonomics, and the G36 deserves more development, not less. Andrew D. Do you think the reason the 45 Colt remains as popular today is because it had military adoption? Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Every cartridge that ever got adopted by the U.S. military, with rare exception, became something popular. We even still see 4570 in some popularity today because it was a military cartridge. If a cartridge receives military adaptation, specifically in the U.S., but even outside of it, you immediately see civilian interest in it, even if it isn't necessarily the best round for the job. There's some sort of lore and panache and zeal and emphasis around whatever the military does must be the right decision, and therefore 45 Colt continues to this day because the military used it, and it became, but so did the civilian base. But that said, when you look at the 45 Colt versus the 4440, reloading aside, 4440 is probably a better cartridge, especially with a black powder load, but yet, here we are. Will W. Did you end up keeping the 50 GI Glock or send it back after your match footage? I did send it back. It was never on the plate for me to keep it. It was completely a loaner, and the 50 GI Glock is back with the guy who makes it. So I don't know that I would have wanted to keep it, to be honest, besides it being an oddity and an interesting gun. It is a really great gun. It fired really well for me and handled really well, but cost, etc. ASDF. Is there a benefit to learning to shoot with iron sights before switching to optics? Yes. It requires more discipline to be able to focus with the front sight and be precise with it. And I would say that a lot of my ability to shoot well, even at a dynamic time-based event like Two Gun Action Challenge or Brutality Matches, is based on my shooting NRA high power across the course with iron sights for a long time, as well as learning to do long-distance wind calls and adjusting your sights, both elevation and windage, gives you a fundamental understanding of ballistics that you will not probably get when just firing a second or third round with a red dot sight when you missed. So I do think there is something to it, and while I'm not saying you need to do it, I would recommend doing it if you have the time and patience to do so. Garrett S. What firearm do you think is overhyped due to media presence? Oh man, lots of them. I mean, the AK, everything's an AK, right? AK is a great gun, but like the hype around it's kind of crazy, and people treat it like a katana going in, like you're using a katana riding into battle on a unicorn. Is it a great gun? Yes. Is it the end-all be-all solution to all things in all detrimental environments, including mud, dirt, dust, and debris? No, it isn't. And so the lore around the AK is just that, lore and sort of absurd. So the AK would be one. Another one is the Dragunov, the SVD. Fantastic. Lightweight designated marksman rifle. Not a sniper rifle. Yep, we're going to see that in the comments. And there's a lot of hype around that seems to be insurmountable. And on the opposite side, all the detrimental and negative stuff about the AR-15 and the M16. Yeah, there were issues, and we've explained that on this channel ad nauseum, but it will never end. Can't fight the lore. And so the negative lore on the M16 is also extremely tiresome. Peterson D. Is it safe to shoot a Springfield trapdoor with smokeless cowboy loads such as HSM? Probably. The trapdoor Springfield is actually a relatively strong locking system, and I have seen lots of people shooting Cowboy smokeless loads in them. If you have a safe and sane and good condition trapdoor Springfield, you are probably safe shooting Cowboy action loads in it, as well as stuff like Trail Boss, etc. But make sure that you're using a good condition gun for that. In fact, reloading manuals even provide smokeless loads for original trapdoor Springfield. So there's an answer right there, right? But I think HSM should be safe. Your mileage may vary. Vox, which fictional firearm do you think was the best suited for its intended implementation? Oh, easily. The M56 smart gun from the Aliens universe. What an amazing weapon that was used with motion tracking in an environment where the enemy did not show up on infrared. M56. JMW. Ever considered doing a long-range precision match with period rifles? World War II, World War I, etc. Yes, and I have. I shot the M1 service rifle matches and the M1 Garand matches in the CMP for a long time. Now they only got to 200, although I've shot them out to 6. Truth is, it ain't fun. It's just a big old struggle. Rebecca F. If your 3 criteria for arming a group of people was reliability, simplicity, and affordability, what would you choose? And she specifically mentions in unknowledgeable hands. This is an instance in which I would choose the AK. The AK is a very simplistic manual of arms. Malfunction remediation is unload, reload, and there's a charging handle and a big paddle safety with relatively easy to understand sights. So the AKM, probably the AK-74 to be specific, but that's what I would choose. Adam A. If you could carry only a CNR eligible pistol, what would you carry? Some flavor of 1911, probably. It's a good gun. It's low capacity, but it does the job. Definitely a CNR, and I think that's what I would go with. It still has a modern handling, unlike a Luger, and when something goes wrong with the 1911, you can still fix it with 2 hands, not 3. Bryce D. Any update on Woodland Brutality? Already said that. Moving on. John, have you ever considered making a video on the basics of getting into black powder and the equipment you may need to start? Yes, lots of people have done that. I don't tend to do things that I've seen other channels do a lot of. I try not to do that, and I think you can find that content on other channels. But maybe people want to see that come from InRange. I don't know. So yeah, I have considered it and probably will. Robert Q. Appendix carry. Dangerous fad or legit option? It's a dangerous fad if you don't know what the hell you're doing. If you take training and properly train with it, get a proper holster, it is absolutely a legitimate option. And people like Craig Douglas of Stealthnark and ECQC class has proven quite demonstrably that this is the most effective combat carry position. So for a civilian or for someone in concealment, don't get me wrong there. So under clock, under stress, in duress, for weapon retention, and ability to use the firearm and get access to it as well as prevent access to it, appendix carry is fantastic, and I would recommend it with training. If you don't have training, I don't know that I recommend any form of carry. Adam B. Do you think historical settings in video games have hurt gun culture and gun history, such as people thinking the Hellriegel was a thing due to Battlefield 1, or helped it by showing some? I think it does both. I think it gives people the wrong impression of firearms and gives them the wrong historical impressions entirely. But I do think it inspires them, or some at least, to learn more. And if you're inspired to learn more, you'll find out what's wrong in the games, and hopefully we'll move on. For the people that are not inspired to learn more, that's more their fault than ours, and it probably won't do us any more negative than positive. But for those that were inspired, they'll go find out that the Hellriegel, for example, was this thing that was an experiment that wouldn't have existed. They'll be like, gee, I wonder why they did that in the game. But then they'll learn more, and that's a good thing. Andy Echo, third time asking, sorry. What is your favorite camo? Not what you think is best, but just what you think looks cool. All the Finnish stuff, straight up. Not because I'm friends with the Finns, I just love it. And they're coming out with a new desert camo, which I'm really excited about. So that'd be my answer. C and L. If you could be an observer to any one event during the Old West, would it be? I hate to be cliche, but I'm gonna be cliche. The gunfight as we know of it at the OK Corral. Really the street fight, the Fremont street fight. There's so much lore around it, and there are so many eyewitnesses that tend to refute or dispute with or conflict with one another, as well as the eyewitness accounts of people in the fight, that I would like to be there to see it. I think we have a pretty good conclusion about what really happened there, but the reality is seeing it would be a different thing. And whether you agree or disagree with the actions of the Earp and Holiday in that event, it was a watershed event in the Old West. And there are even quotes from lawmakers in Arizona that when you come down to it, all law in Arizona is based on the OK Corral. So if I could pick one, it would still be that one. Jonathan B. What is the most influential cartridge in history from a design perspective? Wow, this is going to be controversial, but I'm going to say 5.56, which was, of course, 222 Remington, 223 Remington, and 5.56 Nato. It was the first one fielded in large quantities as a high-velocity, small caliber projectile for low recoil, fast follow-up shots in the field as a combat rifle in large numbers. Let's just put it that way, in really large numbers. And then, of course, that then spawned off the Soviets to do 5.45 and ushered in a whole world of new cartridges. Now, you might argue the 8mm Kurtz, which was extremely important in the development of intermediate cartridges, but I will say that 5.56 was the first one to go to a really small caliber, 22, at very high velocities, and that changed everything. John D. With the K-Arms complete lower being only 1/10 the cost of a complete welded Stone rifle, what components would you recommend that can be easily substituted in order to reduce the overall cost of the rifle? Honestly, you're going to probably not like my answer, but because the What Would Stoner Do rifle is better in terms of its aggregate of parts, I'm going to tell you none. If you don't go with all of the things that build a What Would Stoner Do rifle and build what you call an inspired What Would Stoner Do rifle, you are getting only part of the actual experience of what a What Would Stoner Do rifle actually is. Now, the cheapest thing to probably avoid would be the trigger, the fire control group. But honestly, all of it comes together in a sum of its parts. And I know you're not going to like the answer, but the What Would Stoner Do rifle was not built around cost, but built around balance, functionality, lightweight, and all of the things that make that triangle the perfect balance in the field. And if you take any of them away from it, in my opinion, it's no longer What Would Stoner Do build. Of course, I'm biased, right? Jonathan, if Ian is participating, oh, well, he's not. So I guess we can't answer that question. Well, we can. I can answer it because I'm reading it. As a fellow lefty and someone far more experienced than I, what holster would you recommend for a 2G ACM type match? I can tell you right now, the UM84. UM84 can be flipped to right hand or left hand. It has the flap to protect your gun from dirt and debris, and it also is great for retention. So I would absolutely recommend a UM84, and that's what Ian uses a lot of the time, as well as it fits almost every service pistol you can stick in it. Eki T. Which do you consider the greater force multiplier? Semi-automatic capability or modern optics? Semi-automatic capability. Absolutely. There is absolutely nothing that can keep up with a semi-automatic in the bolt action field. And even if you put modern optics on a bolt action, you will not keep up with a semi-auto, even with irons, except if you're talking about extreme long range or something like that. But in combatives, absolutely semi-automatic. If you gave me the option between the best optic on the best bolt action rifle or manual rifle, and you gave me a semi-automatic with iron sights only, I will go for that semi-automatic iron sighted weapon every single time. Mike K. Would you buy body armor, medkit, or stockpile ammo first? Medkit, easily. The chances for you needing body armor or a stockpile of ammo is extremely low. The chances of you needing medical equipment for all sorts of reasons is, I should think, obvious. I would go for the medkit every single time. Yuri R. What is your worst firearms-related injury? I don't really have one. A burn, probably maybe a cartridge burn or putting my arm on a hot barrel or suppressor. I've never really been hurt using firearms, not really significantly. And so proper handling and use of firearms or training can be a very safe activity, and I don't really have one. Not even an accidental one. Mr. Smileys. What is your opinion on firearm shows that the major media groups make, like Top Shot and the History Channel? For the most part, they suck. Tales of the Gun was pretty good. Top Shot had the potential to be good. They ruined it, in my opinion. I was actually part of the very first selection process, potentially for the very first season of Top Shot, and it was an interesting experience. That said, this is nothing to denigrate the people that won Top Shot. I know a few of them, and they're excellent shooters and really cool people. But Top Shot had the potential to bring history and training and practical shooting to a group, an audience that did not see it before, and in my opinion, they failed. Um, don't like Top Shot. They started turning it into Survivor with guns and drama and nonsense, and not interested in that whatso freaking ever. Tales of the Gun's pretty good. I like that, and that should have been continued. Bodkin. In an old video, Carl disparages the CZ52. Please explain. Oh yeah, it's a piece of garbage service pistol. It is overly complex with firing pins that break, that's heavy, not reliable, and low capacity. So if you're going to fire 30 Mauser or 7.63 Tokarev, get yourself a Tokarev. Don't bother with the CZ52. Daniel O. What's your philosophy on plate carriers versus chest rigs for home defense? You're never going to have the chance to put on a plate carrier or chest rig for home defense, so neither apply. When it comes to home defense, you're going to have what's available to you, and you're not going to have time to respond quickly enough to put either of those on. You're going to have a rifle. So what I would do is consider putting whatever you want on your rifle. One of the things you see back in the Soviet-Afghan war was putting a med kit in the triangle stock. Consider something like that. Nakasalsa. What are your thoughts on the Finnish military looking to replace their SVDs with a new DMR in 7.62x51 NATO? Well, I think replacing the SVD makes sense. There are a lot of options in the world that can perform better than the SVD now, but I would not do it in 308 or 7.62x51 NATO. I would look at a 6.5 cartridge like a 6.5 Creedmoor. I think the military focus on 308 and 7.62x51 is silly, and we have shown that there are cartridges in the world far better with far better ballistic effect and better ballistic coefficients that should be chosen. So if you're going to pick a precision rifle for DMR or sniping, it should absolutely not be 7.62x51 NATO. Brian I. Your top 5 least favorite guns that are common. This could go into the esoteric. I put common into this. So Brian, I'm going to say my top 5 least favorite. The BAR, terrible gun. M1 carbine, never reliable. Mosin Nagant, yeah, bring a hammer to beat it open. Nagant revolver, what a nightmare. And we mentioned it earlier, the CZ52. That'd be my top 5. Svds. Having tested the Ultimax at SHOT Show, what are your opinions on constant recoil as a military weapon? Good to have or gimmicky? There is nothing gimmicky about constant recoil as a concept. Once you've fired a constant recoil gun, you will never want to go back to one that is not. And the fact that we do not see more designs leveraging the concept of constant recoil absolutely blows my mind. Kyle C. What are the benefits of having an over-under shotgun compared to a side-by-side field of view when you're trying to track moving targets? So an over-under is good for trap and skeet because you're guiding and tracking and trapping a moving target. It is just better for that. That's it. That's all there is to it. Functionally, I think functionally and for combatives, a side-by-side is better. Jose Hey Soup. If the magazine is the key failing of the M1 carbine, could a redesigned, modern, reliable magazine be developed? I argue that the magazine is one of the failings of the M1 carbine, not the only failing. I think the M1 carbine gas system is a huge problem, and I do think that the mostly straight wall design of the cartridge is a problem as well. So it's not the only problem. Could a modern, reliable magazine be developed? Yes. Would it help? Yes. Is it going to happen? I don't think so. Justin, any sage wisdom for us new stage designers and match directors? Absolutely. Start small. Don't go too big. Don't make it too physically demanding. Get your sea legs by doing small matches, say as small as you can get it, 10 people, 20 people, and don't go too crazy right off the bat. Figure out what you can handle, what your shooters can handle, and then ramp up over time. Chance H. Thoughts on the mobile game Girls Frontline? I have no thoughts. I have no idea what it is. I looked at it. It looks like anime girls in combat or something. I laugh while I want. I don't know. My thoughts are. Angus, do you think polymer casings will eventually become the norm? Or is this a fad? Well, it certainly hasn't been given up on. The polymer casings have been going on since, what, the 90s? And we haven't quite got there yet. I think we'll eventually get there. I really do. I think it's going to be a huge deal when we do, and it will be a revolution in ammunition design. So, will it be the only thing that we'll develop? No. But do I think we'll eventually see polymer casings become a real thing? Yes, I do. Galen P. Oh, this is a big one, guys. In the PPE video published on July 9th, Carl expressed his opinion that everyone should wear a mask in public. I respectfully disagree for the reason that herd immunity is the best means to protect the more vulnerable members of society as COVID-19 is here to stay. Let me address that right off the bat. Herd immunity is not attainable without a vaccine. There has never been an instance of herd immunity that I'm aware of, and you can tell me otherwise, but you better put your references in the comment. Don't say, oh, this happened because references. But there has never been herd immunity acquired except with a vaccine. We do not yet have a vaccine. And herd immunity against the vulnerable is a counterproductive statement. The only way you would achieve herd immunity without a vaccine, which we don't have, would be letting the vulnerable die in the process. Now, unless you're a might is right sociopath, herd immunity through letting the vulnerable die is not protecting the vulnerable, it's killing the vulnerable. And I would argue that putting on a freaking face mask, a simple piece of cloth over your face, not only for the psychological benefit of those around you, but also the demonstrable benefit of being less of a spreader if you're infected with this particular virus, is a simple thing to do that is not a big ask. If that is a big ask to you, I have to wonder, and I would ask you to be introspective, why is this a problem? If you see this as a form of government tyranny, you have not seen government tyranny. You have also seemed to have no concept of humanity and community, because the people around you that are vulnerable should not be exposed to a disease that will potentially kill them, even if it won't kill you, because you're too much of a narcissist or self-centered individual to put a piece of cloth over your nose and mouth. There are two ways to achieve herd immunity, this person argues. The majority of society gets the virus and naturally creates antibodies. Show me that without a vaccine. Two, the majority of society gets a vaccine, which currently does not exist for COVID-19, thus artificially creating antibodies. Two is correct. You need a vaccine to acquire herd immunity in a reliable sense, as well as if you are saying that we should just let everyone get it, including those thus vulnerable in our community because you're unwilling to wear a mask, how is that not saying that you're willing to expend the vulnerable around you? If that's your mindset, that's fine. You're probably not a proper in-range viewer. If that's not your opinion, I don't understand how saying I should not wear a mask so that we acquire herd immunity, but at the same time saying that the herd immunity protects the vulnerable, but the people first affected that are going to die are the vulnerable in your effort to acquire herd immunity is a counterintuitive. I can't get my head wrapped around that logic. I just can't. Matt J. Hey, Carl, would you ever be interested in touring Civil War battle sites in the Southeast, maybe in your Western vignette style? Yes, and it's in my plans to do someday. I will absolutely be doing that. Joshua H. Do you think that S&W top-break revolvers, such as the Schofield, were tactically superior to the single-action Colt, despite the latter being more popular? Yes, absolutely. There are issues with the Schofield in terms of reliability and complexity, as well as we've talked about on the channel, ammunition distribution to cavalrymen in the field getting the wrong ammo. But in a singular event of a gunfight in which the round count goes below a certain number, the Schofield is the most advanced, combative, capable gun that was produced during the Old West. Not the Moore and Hulbert, even though people like to think that. It was the Schofield top-break revolver that could have won the fight based on the advantage it brought to the fight. ADK. Regarding the Spencer rifle, has anyone ever tried to modify the lever to be a closed loop or allow cock on lever open, perhaps wielding a looped cocking bar around the pivot point? Considering it coexisted with the Henry and Winchester, should such a modification appear to offer an obvious benefit? I don't think so, and I don't think there ever would be an effort to do that. The Henry is also a kludgy action that occasionally jams if you don't shake it. Its loading system's a little weird, and the cartridges have to be very carefully loaded to overall length, even more so than in the Henry action. So considering the Henry already existed and the Winchester 1866, the Spencer was a dead-end design. Martin H. You mentioned in the video 1860 Colt versus cartridge conversion that you put a special oil on your percussion revolver. What exactly is that secret sauce to get 40 shots without having any black powder falling? Okay, well, not a special oil. I clean with Ballistol. I use a mix of beeswax, lard, and boar butter as my lubricant, or SPG, black powder lubricant, both on the arbor, which is the pin that's around the cylinder, and as lubricant on the cartridges themselves. If you properly lubricate the bullets in your cartridges, whether they're paper or not, or fill the chambers with lubricant if you're using round ball, you will go a much longer time than if you don't use any lubricant at all, which will foul the gun very rapidly within 1 or 2 cylinders. Additionally, putting some of your black powder lube, whether it is your home concoction or SPG, on the arbor will go a long way as well. The Colts are particularly good in this regard because the arbor has treads cut into the arbor that allow fouling and debris to get caught in it versus something like the Remington New Army. Oh my gosh. That's the last question. This went pretty quick, 45 minutes. I don't know how that happened. I guess I spoke rapidly, which you guys tend to complain about. If you want, you can watch this at half speed or something. I don't know. But I'd like to thank all of the Patreon supporters that allow InRange to exist. Again, we have no sponsorship, no corporate overlords. It's completely viewer supported. And it is you that have proven that you want this kind of content that has no masters. If you are one of them, thank you so much. If you're not one but would like to consider it and would like to add your questions to the Q&A, we would really love to have you. We have a whole community that's formed around InRange on our Discord server and in our matches and etc. And we are an alternative voice in the firearms culture, not just myself as a host, but as a collective and an aggregate of supporters and us in the community. And I think that's a powerful thing because the firearms community needs to have that in it. We are not a monolithic thing. We are a unique group of people of all walks of life, of all forms and shapes and genders and everything you can think of under the sun. And don't let anyone tell you that belief in rights and freedom and firearms is something that should be only for one group of people. They're wrong. And your right to that and self-defense is something that is inalienable regardless of who you are or what you are. So it is our community here at InRange forming that's one of them. And I am glad to see this happening. And I don't think we're the only alternative voice, but there's a need for alternative voices in this culture and this community. Guys, thank you so much. If you can't, I do understand. Please consider supporting us via sharing with your friends. We're distributed on multiple distribution points. We're not just on YouTube. You can find them all at inrange.tv/watch. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community.